Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the QT2 Systems Podcast Series, The Coaches of QT2. My name is Reem Jishi, and I'm the Content Director for QT2, and our featured guest today is Coach Molly Zahr. Welcome, Molly.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks for joining us today.
Mhm.
All right, so Molly, I'm going to start with the question that I always ask, which is how and when did you join QT2 as an athlete?
I joined QT2 as an athlete in 2008. And I had been somewhat connected to Jesse and actually his wife, Chrissy. I found out about them. Chrissy, Jesse's wife, had a relative who worked for my father, and somehow they figured out the connection. And I remember it after a race I had done in Lake Placid. It had gotten back to me that Jesse and I had actually gone back and forth during that entire race. We finished within about 90 seconds of each other. And I didn't know who he was. I don't know if he knew who I was during the race, but he knew who I was afterwards. And I remember my dad coming in and telling me, like, oh, this guy told me that they know of you, and Jesse saw you there, and he said, I'd love to have her on my team. And I didn't really think much about it at that point because I was working with a different group, and things were going pretty well. So I was like, oh, that's nice. And then I think I saw them again. We started running into each other races. I saw them. I think we stayed at the same hotel in Kona in 2007. And then in 2008, I had been, again, working with the same coaching company for a while. And the program was fine. I did pretty well with it, but it wasn't as individualized. It wasn't as focused on, who you were, and nobody was really paying attention to me. It was like, here's your program and go do it and have fun. And no individual attention and that kind of thing. So I was actually at that point just sort of going to move on and do it on my own. And that was the year that Caitlin Snow won in Lake Placid, and I just sent Jesse a nice email congratulating him because I knew he coached her, and that, what a great thing it must be for him as a coach. And he's the one who actually said to me, like, I'd really love to coach you if you'd be open to that. And I thought about it for a little while because, again, I was just going to do my own thing, and I had been pretty burnt out. I was a little bit injured. I was just kind of not in a great spot, and I figured, like, what the heck, let's try this. Let's try with somebody who's actually going to, like, pay attention to me and, help me reach my potential. So I figured there was no harm in trying it. So that's kind of how I started. A couple months after that, like, I finished out that season on my own, and then I just started with Jesse at the end of that year.
Okay. I'm going to go back and ask you some more questions on that and back up a little bit, but just tell me first, when did you start working as a coach with QT2?
I started working as a coach in 2010.
Okay. And so you've been racing for a while now, right? Tell me about your first triathlon and how you decided. And if you have to back up before then to set context, go ahead.
So I did my first triathlon in 2002, which was one of the Danskin all women's sprint series that a lot of us, female triathletes started with back in those days. There was one right near me. I'd never really thought about doing a triathlon before that. I'd seen Kona on TV like pretty much everybody else, but it was never sort of on my radar. I played a lot of team sports growing up, mostly basketball, but like softball and soccer and stuff too. And I hated running. I was not a fan. I used to ride my bike all over the place, and I grew up on the water, but I should say, like, swimming, but not like real swimming, not freestyle swimming. In fact, I was pretty bad at that too. I was in summer camp. I think they bumped me up out of the minnow group finally after like 3 years, just because I was way taller than all the other kids. But I always loved the water and I always had fun with it. So I had kind of those pieces. But my senior year of college, I just started running on a treadmill just to get in shape for my final basketball season, because it was like, all right, this is it. Like, I want to sort of make the most of the end of my athletic career, because I had no idea what I was going to be doing after that. And my sister had actually run the Boston Marathon a couple times, just for charity. Just a kind of a run for fun type person, but she showed me that like it was possible to actually improve. And after I started running on a treadmill, I'm 6 feet tall, so I was big and slow, and I was a lot heavier back then too. So I was constantly kind of yelled at for being slow on my basketball teams and all that kind of thing. So, but my sister was the one who kind of showed me, like, if you just keep running, if you do it consistently, it's like, oh, it does get easier. And I did find that when I finally started running on my own, on the treadmill every day. And then my first job when I graduated was just working at a gym, and I just sort of kept it up. It was like, all right, I like how this feels. Let's keep this going. And I started doing like spin classes at the gym, and I started biking a little bit with my dad, who had been a cyclist. And same sort of thing. Like I would see what he had done and be like, oh, I can't believe, like, a 30-mile ride. You go and ride 30 miles. And that sounded insane. Like and when my sister ran the Boston Marathon, we went down to watch her because luckily my college dorm was like it's a mile from the Boston Marathon finish line. And my brother-in-law that year jumped in and kind of ran the last 4 miles with her. And my mom suggested, she's like, oh, next year she does it again, you can do that too. And I actually said to her, I was like, I no way I could run 4 miles. Like, absolutely. That was even the 4 miles, not just a marathon, but 4 miles seems totally out of the realm of possibility. But yeah, I just kind of, after I graduated, I just sort of kept up with things. And then I had been house sitting for a relative who had done the Danskin race. Like, it was a mother-daughter who had done it, and just totally for fun. Like, they're not big triathletes or anything, but it was just kind of an annual thing that they did. And they had a poster on the wall. And when they came back from their vacation, I was like, that seems like it might be kind of fun. Like, what do you think? Should I try that? And she was like, definitely sign up. I'm going to do it. I'll show you the course. You can come with us. It'll be great. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do that. And then I signed up, and then I started swimming like totally on my own. I just hopped in the pool at the gym, and I don't remember. I'm sure it was rough, but yeah, I just kind of kept at it, and I was really excited about it. And then, so it was a sprint, so it was pretty short. And it, again, the Danskin series is like very beginner friendly. So it was very laid back, and they there was nothing to worry about in the water. Like, there are plenty of people watching you. I think in this particular swim course, I could have walked the swim course if I wanted to. Like, it wasn't anything to be concerned about. And I should back up a little bit too, because I had to get a bike. Because when I was riding with my dad at first, I was riding like an old mountain bike I'd had since I was 12 years old. And so he took me to the bike shop, and he was like, all right, we'll get you a real road bike, and then you can ride with me. And then we went to the bike shop, and after about 10 minutes, he came over to me and he said, I'm going to get a bike, and you're going to use my old bike. And I was like, okay, that's fair. So I was riding his old road bike, and I'd been riding with him. So we always went out and just tried to like crush each other. Like, I rode with him all the time when I first started riding. It was just try to go as fast as we could all the time. So I took to the bike pretty easily, pretty quickly. And then I remember during the race, like, that part was probably the most fun for me, was passing everybody on the bike. And then got to the run, and I realized that I'd forgotten to practice transition runs. And even though I knew I could easily run by then 3 miles, no problem, but I definitely walked some, because I was like, this is a new feeling, and I don't know how I feel about this. But yeah, I finished. I thought it was great fun. And then right away, I'd already signed up to do Timberman, which was 4 weeks later, because I had, again, heard that it was only the second year that it existed in New Hampshire. And I was like, oh, a half Ironman, like, that sounded scary, but I was like, I think I might want to try that. Like, there's one right here. Why don't we give it a shot? So right away, I jumped up to half Ironman. And I think, like, physically I'd done the training, but I was totally ill prepared for like the nutrition side of it. And the fact that it also was very unusual that year, was about 98 degrees, which is not something that we experience a whole lot up here in the Northeast, even in the middle of summer. So it was a struggle. It was really, really hard. And I had no idea about bottle hand ups or nutrition. I had like Rice Krispie treats and gummy bears as my nutrition. I carried a Camelback because I didn't know that you could like exchange bottles on the course. And it was like, it was very, very hard, but and I felt awful when I finished. And I was pretty slow. I wasn't terrible, but I was, pretty slow. But again, like most people, I think who were kind of meant to do the sport, like after a couple days, it was like, oh, I think I should sign up for that again. And I think I can do it better next time. I think I can get faster. So that's kind of where my first season landed me in at that point.
Wow. So that's pretty amazing. So you go from a sprint to a half
Mhm.
to, all right. So then did you do that same Timberman the next year?
Yep, I did. Yeah, the next year I did. I think that was I did the dance skin race again. Like I roped a friend into doing it with me. But immediately I was like, all right, I think I'm all set. Like I think I'd already grown out of the dance skin series, which was fine. Like it was, I think it's it was a fantastic way to get people into the sport in sort of a non-intimidating environment. But I'd been working a lot harder and I was like, all right, I feel bad passing people on the bike and that kind of thing. But yeah, I'd signed up for Timberman again and I trained a lot harder. And I mean, at that point, this was before there were nearly as many online coaching things. Like, so I was just like, I had actual books I was reading, trying to learn as much as I could about training and how to get faster and how to do things the right way. So I went like almost an hour faster, I think, on my second attempt at Timberman. It was much better. So that was definitely a lot more fun.
Okay. And then you moved up to Ironman distance pretty quick after that, right?
Yep, that was the following year. So Timberman was in August of 2003. So I signed up for Ironman Lake Placid the following year, like a month before that. And I'd always kind of, when I first started doing triathlon, it was like, oh, I'll do an Ironman within like 5 years. And then pretty quickly I was like, I think I might be ready to try that sooner. And Lake Placid it was just like the closest. It made the most sense. So, and the timing was good. So I was like, all right, I think I'm going to sign up for that. And I didn't know anybody who did it. I didn't know, at these races, I would just go and like, I knew my parents who came to support me and that was pretty much it. So yeah, so it was like 2 years after I did pretty much 2 years, almost exactly after I did my first triathlon, I did my first Ironman.
Yeah. So what was your experience with your first Ironman?
It was pretty good. I think, and this is why I think it's so great to be able to coach other people to do their first Ironmans, so I can remove this from them. Cause it was like, from the second I signed up, I was sort of terrified and like had that, how am I going to do this now? Like, even though I was reading everything and it just felt like I had to be focused on it literally for that entire year and worried about it for the whole year and sort of wondering about it. But I guess in some ways that was good because I was very prepared. Like I mapped out my whole training schedule and I was very meticulous about making sure that I was doing enough and covering all my bases and figuring it out. So yeah, I think I remember like having anxiety before the race and being worried before the race, but it was like just before the cannon fired, I felt much calmer. I was just like, no, you did everything. You're going to be okay. Like, just relax. And I'd also read enough about like, it should never feel hard. It should never be like, if you don't feel like you could pedal that bike forever, you should definitely slow down. So I knew I wasn't going to be like, really pushing myself the whole time. I knew it was going to be hard, but I also knew that if I just kept it easy and kept going and kept eating and drinking and all that stuff, that I was going to be okay. It went pretty well. I mean, this was 2004. So it's back in the day where you had the mass start, everybody started at the same time. So that was a little chaotic. But it wasn't too awful. I did survive and yeah, the bike went pretty well. I was comfortable. I think the run was a little bit rough because I had tested my nutrition only on some training rides and stuff, but I never run long. So I ate like too many Cliff Bars and my stomach was a little bit unhappy about that. So I had some walking on the run, but overall, I mean, I think like most people, I went in saying like, all right, main goal, I just want to finish. That's it. And then my other goal was to break 12 hours. I was like, that seems like a reasonable goal. And I think I'd gone like 5:25, 5:30 at my fastest half Ironman, or my second half Ironman at that point. So I was like, all right, 12 hours seems reasonable. And I went, I think it was 11:21 or something like that. So I was really happy with how that went.
So that's pretty incredible. So you went, you grow up as a team athlete where running is sort of a necessary evil perhaps, or that's how I started running. Was I played midfield in soccer, and I'm like, I need to be better at soccer, so I have to be better at running, and that's why I started. So running was always for some other reason, not
Yep.
in itself. And then to go and be at 11:20 something for the first Ironman, so you kind of found your sweet spot pretty
Yeah.
right. Okay, so then tell me about, you had a really, really strong race career, right? Early on from here. So tell me about the next few years.
Yeah. So obviously, like most people, I think right off the bat, it was like, okay, I would love to qualify for Kona. So that's going to be like the next goal. So, 2005, again, I signed up for Lake Placid because it's right there. I knew it. I loved the course. I thought it was beautiful. It's very similar to the terrain that I train in. So it's a really good race for me to do anyway. So I signed up for that, and that was kind of my main focus again. And it was just building off of what I'd done before. I also I got my first tri bike going in the 2005 season. So that was helpful too. Like before I was just on like a road bike with the clip on aero bars and stuff. So yeah, and then again, I trained pretty much just as hard. I don't think I changed a whole lot, going into that following season. And I knocked like 20 minutes off my time or something, and it was good enough to qualify me for Kona. I didn't have the stomach issue, so my run was a little bit better. That was nice. So I went to Kona for the first time in 2005. And I will say, I don't think that I have ever enjoyed a race as much as I enjoyed my first Kona, because I went in with the attitude of like, I just want to enjoy this. I just want to, I worked so hard to get here and to do this, and I just want to enjoy this experience. And again, I was great at reading things that kind of scare you into like, relax, don't try to go too fast, don't try to, win your age group or anything like that. I hadn't won my age group anyway, so it's not like I was just like, I'm not going to be one of these super fast people. I'm just going to be one of these people who finishes. And I wound up, I think because of that, I was so relaxed. Like I had a really good race. I think my swim was a lot slower. My bike was actually faster in Kona that year than it was in Lake Placid. We were lucky with the wind. It wasn't a very windy year. And my run was like a minute slower. It was almost exactly the same. Like, because again, I think I was just that relaxed. I was that calm. It was like, drink enough, eat enough, pay attention to all those things. So removing that pressure, yeah, it was just fun. I really took in the whole experience. But then, like most people, the following year, it was like, all right, now I want to get faster. Now I want to do better. And I think I had started kind of applying for all kinds of random different things. Most of this stuff doesn't exist anymore, but back then there were like Balance Bar did grant programs, and there were different teams you could apply for and whatever. So I was just applying for anything. So I applied to be on this team for a coaching group, and I made that team. So I was coached, but it wasn't, again, I think I mentioned it wasn't the same personalized experience, but it was a decent experience. Like I did have obviously good workouts. I had, and a couple years of racing and training underneath me. And also, they did help me see that I could go a little bit harder during races. Like I think I took to heart too much, like the go easy, be comfortable. And I was like, no, you do need to go easy and be comfortable, but you don't have to be too comfortable. So, so that year I did, sign up for Lake Placid again, because it's right there. And there weren't as many races to choose from back then either anyway. So, and everything just clicked. Like I've never before had a race where everything just went perfectly. Like I never had a hiccup. I never had a moment where like my stomach hurt or I felt like I had to slow down or anything. So all I wanted to do that year, I think I'd gone 11:08 the year before. And all I wanted to do that year was break 11 hours. And instead I went 10:11. So I knocked a whole bunch of time off. Like I had a fantastic bike. My swim is actually slow that year. I don't know why. I think every year in Lake Placid, the swim got more and more crowded before they changed it and took away the mass start. But yeah, my bike went fantastic. And then my run was, I still haven't matched that run. It was just, again, it was perfect. But it was also, so that year there were no female pros in the race. So I was leading the race, and I started leading the race right out of T2, like right when you run down that hill, I ran past the woman who was leading. So for the entire run, I had a motorcycle escort and like the lead bike person with me. So I knew that I was in the lead, and I didn't expect to keep it because, again, I hadn't always been a great runner. So I was just sort of counting the miles in my head, like, okay, now I can say I led through 5 miles. Now I can say I led through 10 miles. Now I could say, like, I was like, oh, now after 10, let me just lead through the first loop. So like I can see my family leading the race. And because there was a girl, I could see the next girl because it was, again, back when we all started together. So you knew if you were in front, you were in front. There was no like, oh, she started 3 minutes after me or whatever. There was a girl, she was very small, and I was like, oh, she's probably going to catch me, but she just, every out and back, she was kind of the same distance behind me. So at a certain point I was like, oh, I think I might actually keep this lead. And I did. Like, I just felt so great the whole time. So yeah, I won that race, and so that was obviously great. And then in Kona that year, actually 2006 and 2007, I was top 10 in my age group in Kona. So that was, again, really good. In 2007, I did, though, make the mistake. That was when I sort of started to get a little bit too aggressive with my own, with my race planning. This comes from not having anybody overseeing you to say like, hey, like, I know things are going really great, but like, chill out a little bit. You're kind of overdoing it. So that was sort of the beginning of a little bit of a downslide, because I did in 2007, I raced Ironman Arizona. I won my age group. So I qualified for Kona again, but I did Lake Placid again because it was like, how can you not go back when you won the year before? But already it was like, this is a lot to, and back then Ironman Arizona was in April. So it was like race in April, Ironman in July, and then do Kona. So by Kona that year, I was like, I was definitely feeling the burnout. And then 2008 is when I had some injury issues. Like I just had some random like back stuff started seizing up, things that I had never dealt with before. And yeah, so that's kind of where I was when I talked to Jesse, like I mentioned before, and started being like, all right, I need to change. I can't just keep doing the same thing. And I need somebody who's going to tell me what mistakes to not make, so that, sort of save me from myself.
Yeah, it sounds like you just kept pushing yourself harder and harder and seeing how much more your body could tolerate. And at some point, your body's like, no, we're done, right?
Yep, and not taking breaks, and not taking, like, at the end of the season, just being like I feel like for several years, I could have probably woken up every day and done a half Ironman if I needed to. And like, I guess on some level that's nice, but at a certain point, that's just too much. That's just, nobody can sustain that. So you definitely need to take breaks, and you need somebody to be like, no, we're not going to do all these races. You're going to do this race and this race, and you're going to focus on those, and you're going to feel great for those, and you're going to be healthy the whole time.
So when you came over and you started working with Jesse, what would you say was the biggest difference in terms of how he approached coaching you?
Just constant feedback. I mean, it was so new to me, and having somebody who was always knew what I was doing and is always paying attention to me, and who, obviously we talked quite a bit. It was nice to have somebody to talk to about my training, talk to about how I was feeling, and to sort of reassure me that, yeah, you're on the right track, instead of just sort of being like, I think I'm doing all right. Like, I don't know if I'm doing all right, or am I doing too much or too little, or, whatever. And it was nice that I remember, because obviously, like anything, like a few times I was in a bad place when I started with him. Like I gained a lot of weight, and I remember actually my first meeting with him, I actually went down and met him in person to I had met him before, but my first official meeting as an athlete to do a threshold test and all that kind of stuff. I called a friend on my drive down because I was so nervous, and I'm not generally a nervous person, but I was nervous to talk to him. I was like, he's going to turn me around and send me away, because I'm I put on like 30 or 40 pounds after being injured, and I just felt awful. He's going to be like, no, never mind. Like, I don't want you to work with me. But the thing about working with him was that every time I talked to him, no matter what sort of place I was in, I always felt better. Like, I always felt like, oh, okay. Like, he had a good way of putting things in perspective, and in a very matter of fact sort of way. Like, it wasn't sort of, you know, cushy, like, like his words had a lot of meaning there. It wasn't just like, you can do it. It was like really good feedback, really good talks, and with a lot of knowledge and experience, and data to back it all up, I think. So that was definitely, I think, the biggest thing was having and feeling supported, I guess, too, just having somebody along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps when someone else is out there and they're watching what you do and paying attention and
Mhm.
seeing things that maybe you don't see in yourself or don't want to see in yourself, or
Yeah.
anyway, the perspective, right?
Yeah.
So what was the plan then? You started in fall of 2008. You said you had put on some weight, so you needed
Yeah.
comeback strategy.
Yeah. So yeah, my goal, as was with every year prior to that, like, was to qualify for Kona again, and to just get back to the track of getting faster every year. Cause I'd sort of got faster every year up until 2006, 2007, a little bit slower, but when I did do Lake Placid that year, I also crashed on the bike. I finished the race, but obviously that kind of took me out a little bit mentally, and I already had a Kona slot, so I wasn't really that concerned about getting faster. But so yeah, it was just sort of get back on track and like to again progress and get faster. So we're going to go back to Placid again, because back in those days, QT2, we all kind of did the same races together, and luckily everybody was doing Lake Placid that year. So it was like, all right, let's go. Started with Oceanside, which was a really solid race. Like, I was very happy with how that went. We all went down to St. Croix, which was that was a little tougher, just because, again, I trained in the Northeast. It's cold. I live in New Hampshire. I didn't actually, I can't remember if I mentioned that or not, but so, early May, like, going down and doing a race where it's 95 degrees out and super humid is a little bit rough, but had a great time and, good experience. And then, then I went to Lake Placid, and I wound up having not my best race. I didn't better the race from before, but I won my age group. But, I accomplished that goal of getting back to Kona, and then the plan again was to do well in Kona. Unfortunately, I did wind up with a stress fracture in my training between Lake Placid and Kona. I think it was just, it was a lot. And I think I had been, again, I think having to lose a bunch of weight throughout that season, like, we did the best we could, and I did get back to where I needed to be. But, it's a challenge, I think, for anybody to sort of do both, to be on top of your training game and not be a little bit too depleted going to get where you need to be. But so that was kind of the whole plan. But so I did go to Kona. I found out I had the stress fracture about 2 weeks before, and I went, and I debated maybe walking the marathon, but in the end I decided, I was like, I've finished this race before, so I don't necessarily need to do that. I think so I did the swim and the bike, and I just dropped out after that.
Okay. So that takes us through 2009, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So then after that, because you're still racing today. So let's work through your history a little bit.
Yep. So 2010, we're hoping to sort of, again, get me back on track, like, move past the stress fracture. That year as a team, we were going to go to Ironman St. George, which was in May of that year. So that was a quick turnaround. And I think mentally I was a little bit, I was again not in a great place, because the injury set me back, and even though I had finished Kona before, it was still pretty disappointing to go and not be able to finish. So I think I wasn't in a great mental spot going into that race. So I did St. George, and I just did not have it was one of my worst Ironmans I've ever done. And it wasn't because I wasn't prepared. I think it was because I was mentally not there. I just wasn't excited about it. And it was me getting in my own head. It was just kind of a rough thing. And then we tried to scramble. It was like, all right, well, let's do Lake Placid again, see if you can qualify for Kona there. And that was a terrible idea. I wound up doing even worse there than I had, any other time. And then, unfortunately, in that fall, we were like, all right, let's regroup. Let's train for a marathon. Let's like work on your running, and let's not work on cycling, because cycling was sort of my thing. And then, in the fall of 2010, my father, he was in a cycling accident that unfortunately he passed away from his injuries. So that, obviously set me back some, and not necessarily in terms of being afraid of getting back on my bike, which it was definitely a fear. Like, obviously I didn't do anything for a little while. And I did have that in the back of my head, like, is that going to be something I'm going to be thinking about? And the first bike ride I went on, I was like, all right, it's okay. I think I'm going to be mentally okay to do this and to get through it, because, I enjoy doing this. And I was like, as awful as it was, stuff like that happen. Anything can happen to you on any given day, right? Like you could get hit by a car in a parking lot going to the grocery store. Obviously, there are big risks with cycling, and everybody has to make their own decisions as far as whether or not it's worth it to them. But cycling outside is something that I really love to do. And I think my dad would not be happy if I, stopped just because something happened to him and he had an unfortunate incident. And we don't know. We don't think that he actually had a run-in with car. Nobody was there. We don't know what happened. So, but yeah, I mean, you never know. So, yeah, I got back into sort of trying to train again. And I think I didn't give myself enough time to just get through that. And I tried to sort of just put my head down and train. And I made an even bigger mistake that winter. I decided, I was like, I'm going to go train somewhere warm. I'm not going to stay in New Hampshire and train where it's cold, and we go where it's warm. But I was by myself the whole time. Like I went to Tucson for the winter. And I was signed up that year. Everybody in QT2 was doing Ironman Coeur d'Alene, which was in June. And I was training for that. And again, it was too soon for me to jump back into things. So I wound up with another stress fracture that spring. I actually did one race on it. I didn't realize that my foot was broken at the time. I was just like, why is my foot bothering me? And then did another race and I dropped out in the middle of the run. I was like, something is not right here. And it was like, oh, that's because your foot's broken. So, so then it was like, all right, let's again step back. And because up until then, I'd always been like, there always has to be in the next race. There always has to be something sort of ahead of me. And then it was like, let's take a little break and maybe not train for an Ironman for a little while until you feel ready. And then, so I definitely, I had a major break with a stress fracture. Like I had a whole summer where I couldn't do much of anything. I couldn't even bike like that. My foot was bothering me, even cycling, which I'd always been able to bike at least. But, so yeah, then I just kind of would sign up for usually like 1 or 2 Ironman races a year. But because of that time, I just wasn't as mentally into it. I enjoyed doing the races and I enjoyed being out there, but it was an adjustment because I wasn't at the top of my age group. I wasn't sort of doing as well as I used to do. And I wasn't used to that. So that took a little bit of getting used to. But finally, after a couple of years, like a couple of rough races, I was just doing them kind of just to do them because I didn't know what else I should be doing. One of my friends suggested, let's do Ironman South Africa in 2015. Like, let's go somewhere really cool. And up until that point, I'd only raced all in the US, like mostly Lake Placid, did Arizona, Florida, St. George. And I was like, all right, yeah, that sounds really cool. Let's just do a race. And then I don't have to care how I do. It's like, I'm doing an Ironman in South Africa. Like, that's good enough. And pretty much immediately that made me fall in love with traveling for races and using travel as an excuse for races. And that was the first time I'd left the country since like a family trip to Ireland back in 1999. So that was kind of a big deal. And South Africa that's still probably the longest trip I've ever been on. But then I was like, oh, this is going to be my new thing now. Like, I'm not going to care about how the races go. I'm going to do races in really cool places. So I did Ironman South Africa, and then I did Ironman New Zealand. I did Ironman Sweden and Ironman Ireland. And so doing all these races, again, it was like, it was such a relief to me to sort of take the performance side off the table. And I had gotten used to doing races just to have fun instead of being like, oh, like my result wasn't that great, which, you know, I'd spent a lot of years earlier worried about what my result was. And it was just like, hey, if I can get through these races in one piece, like I'm having fun, that's fine. But somewhere along the way, like finally my fitness started to come around again. And I started actually being like, oh, like, and I have no idea what changed. I don't think anything did. I think maybe it was just sort of relaxing and also just years of training where I was like, oh, my run is actually coming around. I'm actually doing decent here. So it was Ironman Mont Tremblant I did in 2017, where kind of very surprisingly to me, I came in third in my age group and I wound up missing Kona by one slot. And that always bothered me that the last time I'd been there, I hadn't been able to finish. So I wanted to be able to get back and finish it, but I wasn't sure that I was ever going to have that opportunity again. So, so that race, when I was like, oh, I only missed it by one slot and, you know, whatever, 10 minutes or something like that, I was like, whoa, maybe I can actually get back there. So I started sort of believing in myself again, I think, but still having fun too. Like I still had races that didn't go fantastic for whatever reason. And then at Ironman Ireland was the last Ironman I did before the pandemic, which so 2019, I went and I raced there. And that was where I was like, all right, this is it. This is where I'm going to finally kind of make it and get back to Kona. And I was so ready. And the weather was absolutely horrendous. It was like 53 degrees and raining and pouring. They had to cancel the swim, not just because the water was cold, but I mean, there's horrible rip currents. And it was just a miserable day, but I had trained all that spring was awful in New Hampshire. So I trained in miserable conditions. So I was pretty well prepared for that. And I was dressed for it. I think a lot of people weren't dressed for it. So I felt great, was riding, and then I went up flatting and I fixed that flat. And then I rode another 10 miles and I flatted again. And I was all ready to just call it a day and pull out of the race. But the people there were so nice and wonderful and helpful to me that they were like, no, we'll get support here. We'll get you a new wheel. We'll get you sent on your way. I mean, someone gave me a coat to keep warm because it was so freezing. And I mean, I spent an hour by the side of the road, not moving. And I wound up running my way into third in my age group. And again, missing Kona by one slot. And it was like, oh, I'm so close.
With an hour of just sitting on this.
Yeah, because again, it was such carnage. There were so many people a lot of people didn't even start the race. And the bike course was so brutal. And like the cycling, I mean, nasty hills are like, I will take all the nasty hills you want to throw my way. So I had a decent bike split, even in spite of the fact of sitting by the side of the road compared to everybody else, because it was just so slow. And I don't know if it was because I took an hour break, maybe that helped, that my run was actually pretty good, but yeah, so it was like, oh, like I'm so close. All right, next year I'll get there. And of course, the next year was the pandemic. So I didn't get to do an Ironman in 2020 or 2021, because 21, I was signed up for Ireland again. And that was one of the ones that got bumped again another year. And by the time I found out it was getting bumped, it was too late. Like all the US races were full because they were the only place that they were having races. So finally, I was like, all right, I'm going to keep Ireland on the docket for whenever they may have it again. Because I even though it was crazy experience and I flattered and everything, I still loved the race. I loved the people. I wanted to go back. I wanted to do the swim too. I wanted to do the whole race. I was like, all right, I'm going to sign up for a race in the US and I hadn't raced in the US since I think 2016. So I was like, all right, we'll do timing wise. I was like, all right, I did Ironman Des Moines, and it was sort of arbitrary and had nothing to do with much of anything other than it was a time of year that I wanted to race, and it worked out with other races. And it was brand new, and they may never have it again for all I know, but Trained really hard. Luckily, the prep for that race went flawless. Everything felt great. And I finally had a really nice, really good race. And I qualified to go back to Kona this past year. So I did that. And then I did go back to Ireland again in August as well. But I took it very easy. I was like, I just want to get through this in one piece and I want to enjoy it. And that was a fabulous trip. And then I finally got to go back to Kona and finish the race that I hadn't finished since 2007.
Wow.
So yeah.
So that was 15 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great
Mhm.
story.
Mhm.
Full cycle.
Mhm.
All right, so now we can talk to you about coaching.
Okay.
So you joined QT2 as a coach in 2010, right? So I think before we got online, you said that you had been coaching a few athletes before. So how did you go from coaching on your own to coaching for QT2?
Yeah, I mean, coaching on my own, like a lot of people who get into triathlon and kind of enjoy the whole lifestyle aspect of it, I felt like, oh, it would be ideal if I could, instead of being exhausted all the time, working my normal, 8 to 5 job, I can coach people and I can sort of build my own schedule and also just enjoy the aspect of coaching people and helping other people do this thing that, I mean, if you talked to me when I was 16 years old and said, you're going to do that someday, I would have been like, no, that's definitely not going to happen. So, helping other people to get to that point. But I lost my train of thought there. What were we talking about?
We went from coaching on your own to coaching with QT2.
Right. Okay. So I had once I started doing well in races, a couple of people were like, oh, would you mind helping me out? And I was like, sure, well, we can do that. I helped a couple of people do some of their races. And it had always been in the back of my mind. And even when I joined QT2 in the first place, which was very early on in the early days, I was like, man, it would be great to work for them so that I can have, first of all, I can have more athletes, because there's only so many people who are randomly going to approach you and be like, hey, would you coach me? Because marketing is not my forte. That's definitely not part of my skill set, but it was just going to be like kind of an ideal. And in my head, I had been thinking like, God, that would be a great thing. I should probably talk to Jesse about that. But luckily, he's the one who actually said to me first. We were doing, again, because we all did a lot of the same races. We were in the car driving to a local race that we were all doing together. And he's the one who asked me, he's like, would you be interested in coaching for us? And I was like, yeah, that's like ideal. Like that would, if you could have asked me like exactly what I wanted to do in the near future, it was like that. So yeah, that's how that kind of started.
Okay. So when you came on as a coach for QT2, what was your education process at that point?
Yeah, I worked with Tim, and I'm sure that's all been sort of fine-tuned, but Tim was still an actual teacher, I believe, at that point in time. He hadn't sort of left teaching to become a full-time QT2 guy, but clear, I mean, it was very obvious that he was a teacher, because he did a great job with sort of, it had like these, just this step-by-step process of teaching you how to, build a season plan and how to talk to the athletes. And I think they're good about too, like, you don't become a coach and then they're like, here's 10 athletes. It was like, let's start with one and then see how you do with that. And then we'll go back and forth if you have any issues with anybody, and then, gradually add a couple more here and there. But it was just always having somebody to sort of back you up and ask questions to, and not be like, if I don't know the answer, it's easy to find the answer usually, which was always helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, so your years working with Jesse, that must have been part of the education.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Too. So then you started taking on some athletes, and is there a type of athlete that you like to work with, or?
Mm-hmm. I've worked with so many different types of athletes, and I kind of like that I've worked with so many different types of athletes. Basically, I like anybody who's excited about the sport, whether that's because they just learned about it like 2 months ago and are like, I'm going to do one of those. Like, and I've actually this year, for the first time in a long time, I've actually got 3 people who are training for their first triathlons ever, which it's been a while. but they're excited about it. And that's always very exciting to me. But again, you don't have to be brand new to be excited about it. There's plenty of other people who did a few races, or I've got people who took a couple years off and are coming back to it and are like, I'm rejuvenated. I'm really excited about it again. Or, they move to a new phase of life where it's like, oh, my kids are finally not taking up all my time. So I actually can train and do things. And so yeah, basically for anybody who's excited about it and who enjoys it, because I think we've all occasionally, and luckily it's been a while since it's been like this for me, but occasionally you get somebody who you want to ask, like, do you like doing this? Like, you're like, you have to do it. It's fine if you don't want to do it. Like, I want to motivate you because you enjoy it. I don't want to motivate you because you feel like you need to do it for some reason. But so yeah, basically anybody who has fun with it and doesn't put too much pressure on themselves. Like, I think everybody puts some amount of pressure on themselves, but people who just, I guess, like, love the sport like I do. Like, and I think over the years that I've raced, like, I've come to be able to, like, obviously I enjoy doing well. I enjoy doing things like winning my age group or going to Kona, but it's also just fun. Like, I try to do a lot of local races too. Like, I did 9 races last year, and only like 3 of them were big ones. The rest were like 75 people at the local lake. Like, and those are really fun. And it's really fun to kind of get out there and see people who just do it because it is fun, so anybody who finds it fun and exciting and, wants to do better and helping them make that happen is always great.
Okay. So do you have a coaching philosophy or approach?
I don't know if I'd call it necessarily a philosophy, but again, like, for me, the sport is such a lifestyle. It's not like, there's a lot of people who get into it and they throw everything at it. And I think that's great that you want to throw everything at it. But I think for a lot of people, that's just not sustainable. For most of us, I think, like, unless you're a professional athlete, that's not really sustainable. And I think that it can take the fun out of it to a certain point. So for me, I want to make the sport fit into your life in a way that you make the progress that you want to get, or make the progress that you want to see, and do the best that you can, but you still are excited about it and you're not tired and you're not like, there's always going to be a couple weeks, probably, if you're training for an Ironman, especially, there's always going to be a couple weeks or a couple spots here and there where you are going to be exhausted. That's sort of inevitable. But if I can make somebody finish a season and be happy and excited about what they've accomplished, but also still be excited to do it again. Not exactly the same thing, but to do other things the following year, then I feel like I've done my job.
It's good. So when you are working with people, though, that are excited, like they're doing their first race, training for their first Ironman, at some point along the way, they're going to say, uh-oh, right? What did I get myself into? I'm not sure I can do this. So when you get questions like that, when your athletes have doubts, how do you respond?
So I feel like, I think I've worked with enough people at this point, and I've been through all of it myself. At least once, sometimes more than once, depending on what we're talking about. I can say, I think it helps to be able to tell people, like, everybody goes through this. Everybody feels like this at some point. And also remind them that they're doing all the right things. They've got the support that they need. They have the backup. And like, I've done this for however many, it's been almost 15 years at this point. Like, I've coached people for such a long time, and I've seen so many different athletes. Like, I know you are where you need to be. And I kind of hope that they can just trust me on that. And I think another thing that I tell people, and another thing that I've done for myself, is sometimes you just have to shut your brain off and not think about it at all. Because I think there is obviously, there's a benefit to sort of like affirmations and positive thinking, but sometimes you just need to step back and not think about it. It's like, just try to just do it. Like, just take all the runaway thoughts away and just do what you need to do, and don't think about it. So I think that can sometimes help. But I think more than anything, I've found that just telling people that there's usually, and you can almost always see it coming, like there's a certain point, I think in an Ironman build especially, where everybody has that moment of like, oh no, like what's going on here? And it's like, you just need to get through the next like 5 or 6 days, and then I promise you it's going to be fine. But for now, just turn your brain off, and everybody goes through this, but just trust me that you've done everything you need to do. You've done all the hard stuff, like most of the hard stuff is already behind you. Most of the stuff that you need to do to get you there is behind you. And all you need to do is follow the plan. And I think that's another thing that's great about us, is there's such a specific plan in place. Like, there's no guesswork. It's not like you've done the training, now just go race and you'll be fine. It's like, no, you know how hard you need to ride, you know, what your power numbers you need to hit, you know, like the pace you need to run, the heart rates you need to be at, how much you need to eat and drink. Like, there's nothing you need to do anymore besides follow the plan. And I think that helps a ton too.
Yeah. I mean, when you go through this process in training Ironman, you don't do, a lot of people do one a year, one every other year. It's such a big deal to get to it. And so to be able to walk into the race and know that you've done everything right, you know, or everything that you could do, and that there is a plan and it makes sense. And you just, you know, I just do that final execution. And so would you say, do you have any coaching successes that you're particularly proud of?
I think I've got there's so many people over the years that have done some great things. Like, I've had a couple of people qualify for Kona who have done well. I've also had a couple people that I remember who I worked for a couple of years who never quite made it, but they improved so much. It was just during that rough period where it was, I mean, it's only changed really within the last like 2 years, but where for women especially, it just got so hard to qualify for Kona. Like that stopped being sort of a good goal to shoot for, because it was like, if one wrong person showed up to your race, like that goal was out the window. So I think, yeah, I definitely had a few people who, in spite of not reaching that goal, improve. I mean, they nailed their races. Like, there were 2 actually who did the same race in Louisville one year, and they just did everything right, and they were like 5th and 6th in their age groups. And it was like, you know, it was somewhat disappointing, but they were still happy to have nailed their races and to have improved so much. And I've had people too who started with me more as like a casual athlete, and just sort of to be able to finish races, who just throughout the process just got much faster and much better. And, you know, we're able to have in the back of their mind, like, oh, maybe I can try to qualify for Kona or qualify for Boston or something like that. So that was always kind of exciting. And I've also, another one too, was like somebody who had tried to finish Lake Placid twice and missed the bike cutoff. So she was still trying to finally just finish the race. And I mean, it wasn't even close. Like, when she finally was able to do, you know, so it was really awesome to see, after trying for several years, see her finally make that finish line.
Yeah. It's such an amazing feeling when people do things that they never thought that they could do, that they never even imagined that they were capable of doing. I think that's the best part about being a coach.
Yes, it is.
On that potential that they didn't even know existed, you know. So, well, thank you so much, Molly. I really appreciate the time that you took. Such amazing stories, both from your own personal journey as an athlete to you as a coach with QT2.
Thank you.
Thanks.